So we see two things which is very critical. One is basically leveraging AI for the software supply chain security, right? Because one of the key value add of some of these large scale model LLMs are that they can actually process a lot of data. They have a lot of knowledge, right? And that can be leveraged to really how do we strengthen the supply chain security. That's one. Second thing is that the whole AI model security, right? Because that's another black box, which is for most of the supply chain perspective, right? We get these models, very few folks or very few of these models come with the software bill of material or the provenance or the transparency, how it was trained, how it was built. Does it have some, right? So those two are very, to your question, right? I wouldn't say worries me, but that's where I see the roadmap for the supply chain going, right? Trying to leverage the AI as well as trying to help the AI so that it becomes more open and transparent.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Grizz Griswold of FINOS. Hope you're doing well. Today with me, I have Sudhir Prasad of... Where do you work, Sudhir?
Red Hat?
Exactly. Red Hat is a member of FINOS, and actually, I'd been a friend of Red Hat for a long time with a lot of work that I did even before FINOS, but we'll get into that. Sudhir is a director of product management with Red Hat, and specifically around software supply chain security. A lot of S's in there. We will get into that. We'll get into Red Hat. We'll get into software supply chain security. I want to talk about you, Sudhir. Tell me, you're telling me that you have a developer background and then you became a product manager. Let's get into that. How did this all start? Take us back to baby Sudhir.
Sure. I think, as you said, I started my career as an engineer and I always wanted to develop, I would say, systems, and then I moved to software, right? Along the way, took over some of the engineering management challenges, right? But then I realized, I think I would do well if I understand the whole business side. So after 10 years in whole engineering, I moved to product management, doing it for a couple of years. Then I realized I should have formal training. So went back to school, did the MBA at Kellogg School of Business, came back and then been doing product management for almost 10 years.
How was that transition?
It was interesting. When I was an engineer, I always wanted to develop cool thing, the new technology. And that was the kind of achievement, right? You develop some new software or new platform, right? And you're like, okay, I have done it, right? And with your team. But I realized that it brought me more happiness if the customers who we are building it, they are using it and what purpose, right? So we wanted to know exactly that how it's not about just the building the technology, right? Also how it's being used for what purpose, right? And I think transitioning to product management did give me that whole 360 view that, hey, who are we doing this for? Apart from the excitement on the new technology, but also how it would be used, whether it would be valuable or usable or not.
Gotcha. To that, I guess we'll start with the hard questions first. Do you think that developers would be better served to have some of that product management, I guess, training, or even just a view? Because when you said, I feel like you're getting a holistic view as a product manager, and the engineers that I've known and the developers I've known, they've been very focused on maybe one thing, but I guess you see that as a superpower, maybe, to get that holistic view.
I think when we come out of college, as I did, most of the engineers, they come out and they have some passion about some of these specific fields. They're good at either programming or hardware or software. And I think we have this thing, urge to build new things. But at least when I was a developer, pretty much focused on one thing. I really need to develop this feature or this particular software, right? I did not have, at least at that time, right, how it will be used, for what purpose, and what business problem it solves, right? I think having that perspective does help. And I think it will also help in more kind of personal satisfaction that it's not about just building the software, right? Someone is really using it. For example, my first job was at Tandem Computers. I don't know, it shows my age, right? But non-stop systems and HP, right? And first customer visit, I got to see that the New York Stock Exchange is using those systems which I'm building, right? That's like that gives you more perspective that how vital it is that what you are building is being used in some of the critical systems. So that perspective helps. So I think some some of the developers may not want to transition to product management, but I think having that customer interaction will definitely help. And at least both in personal level, that why are they doing it or why they're up all night trying to solve some problem. Also, how it will be used or how it is being used. I think that gives a better perspective.
That's cool. And then I wanted to ask you too about your journey into open source development. And where did you start? Were you always in open source, or was there a transition?
Yeah. So when I joined developer, I joined as an HP, and we were not really doing open source at that time. The first time we wanted to look at open source was this standard of how multiple systems can be managed. And there was common information model, right? And that got me involved into some of the DMTF 6 and other one. That gave me the idea that, hey, if the industry, if enterprises, or if some of the finance stack, we can standardize on common APIs or the common language, that will help even as we evolve the software and technology year to year. Right? I think that was first exposure. Coming to Red Hat was like eye opener. Everything need to be open source. And I really get to see some of the vibrant communities, right? Not just the projects where we were involved, but also the projects or the committees where other industry leaders, right, they are really involved in driving those APIs, right? And it was changed that it's not, generally we always have this perspective that's what we invent or what we write is the best, right? But I think transitioning to Red Hat gave me the perspective that, hey, community does have a sense of where things are going. And it's okay even if it's not invented here. As long as that solves a problem, it's okay. I think I would say that was the biggest one, right? And the second I would say is that it's okay if someone leverages your IP, right? I mean, when I was working other places, the IP was like, okay, I wrote it, it's just all about me or my company. But the sharing the knowledge and sharing the technology, it was another thing Red Hat did very well. And actually, I personally get to expose to this one. It's okay. If you do something new, it's okay to share and it's okay to collaborate and then bring it to market versus just keeping it to yourself. And short term, it may be a better reward, but in long term, it doesn't work out.
So let me further that and ask you, so you deal with software supply chain security, and just thinking about that, and I'm going to say based on the audience for this podcast, we have developers that listen within financial services. We also have managing directors, and that some of them are on the technology side, some of them are on the business side as well within financial services companies. And I don't think it's a huge secret that open source is generally perceived as more secure. But there are always people that question on the software supply chain security side, like working in the open. Let's just stay there before we look deeper into, but working in the open, are there more threats there? Or is this truly a more secure environment by being in the open?
I think that's a fair question, right? And being in open gives us transparency and visibility of the risk profile, right? That's I think the core value prop, right? But having these open source projects, first to your point, right? I would say 90% of applications these days, what is being written, they start with taking these libraries, and it does include all or some of them packages, open source packages, right? So that has been now pretty, I would say, open source has eaten the world or something like that.
Right.
I would put it there. But that does bring this thing that if you look at that, any application has roughly 600 software packages, directly or indirectly. And it is not just coming from one source, right? There are now your application is dependent on so many hundreds of open source packages, which you may not have control, right? And you're relying on community wisdom and secure practices for the security, right? So I would say there is a plus side that at least you are aware of what you are dependent on and what the risk profile is. The downside is you need to be a little bit more careful of the provenance where you are getting things from, because we have seen some of the bad actors trying to exploit these open source communities in terms of checking in malicious code or having libraries which is being picked up not from the source where you wanted it to be picked up, right? some of those things are happening, but community has been very active in terms of trying to see how we can secure and let the users be aware of the risk profile. Plus side and negative side. And what I've seen is the sunshine always helps, right? That's the positive thing about open source, right? You get the visibility. There is nothing secret. If there is a CVE, then it will be reported. And if you are not reporting it, then someone else will look at it and then will report it, right? So that's really thing where I see that why it is being really picked up and then everyone using open source, right? Because they know what they're getting.
Right. And so I think that leads to software integrity. And I know that was one thing that you really wanted to talk about. Developing in the open, is it leading to better software integrity? How are ways that we could safeguard ourselves as a community, let's say the financial services open source community, in order to have better software integrity?
Yeah, I think you have that. I think that's one of the key things, right? I just said it, the visibility of at least the very bare minimum, that what's the provenance of all the libraries you are getting in open source, right? You need to be aware of that. And not only direct dependencies, also the indirectly what they depend on that, right? So knowing the provenance of the packages which you are using is the key thing. Because what we have seen is that the manipulation of these software supply chain, that your dependencies, and someone has actually changed something so that it's picking some libraries from somewhere else, right? So and even in Red Hat, we have those 30 years of experience of trying to take open source project and converting them into product, right? First step is to knowing that can you be aware of the provenance of each of the software artifacts which you are using. And if you are not, then bring transparency to it, right? That, hey, this is where I'm taking these software packages. What is the risk profile for those things? Second thing is find and verify at each stage, right? Generally, signing and verification has been always there, right? It's been like 20 years before. But when I was a developer, we will always sign the software when it's finished product before we ship somewhere. Oh yeah, this is final thing, right? What I would highly recommend is that you should sign and verify at each stage so that you can track. For example, if Sudhir is checking in the code, he should be basically signing each the code commit and pulls request, right? The reason being is that then that way you can be assured that, hey, this code was written by Sudhir, even in open source, right? This is written by Sudhir, this was built by Aaron, and then this is what been shipped then, right? So that whole chain of custody, you have the visibility, and then it's easier to manage if you have the visibility, right? And I think those two things we really stress on. The third is that if you do have policy that things should not be included or should not be picked up from such and such places, then if you have policy, please make it easier for developers or in the whole software supplies development lifecycle to enforce it as early as possible, right? Because putting the burden on developers, being me and developer, that at the very end before they ship, hey, by the way, you have this policy violation, it doesn't help anyone.
So true. Well,
Right.
I was going to say, I want to come back to unburdened developers, but can we go to understanding or finding out the provenance of where a package comes from? I'm going to say on the business side of things, now that you've had that transition to see both sides, why would a business decision maker, what would they need to know about that in order to feel more secure about where the 600 packages that are coming to build this one software system, what do they need to know about figuring out what the provenance is for a particular package? Is that important?
Yeah. So one thing is very, to your point, right? So if we just take the stats, right? So 90% of the code is open source code, which any new applications, right? Of course, we rely on our own software developer to do the right thing, right? But to really assess that the software is secure, right? I do need to know that what's the risk profile for the rest 90% of the code base which I'm taking in, right? And the first step is to know where these 90% of the code is coming from, right? Is it signed? Is it not verified, right? Because what we have seen, I think we said some of these supply chain attacks is that those malicious packages or even test libraries, right? They have been picked up from different systems, which the developer unintentionally included them, right? Not that they maliciously or they purposefully included these different packages, right? So having the business leaders know that, hey, I am taking these, my developer has developed these applications and these things came from there. They give them visibility that, are they coming from the secure places? So simple thing, are the packages which you are including, are they signed? Where are they coming from? What's the risk profile of them, right? That gives them a business leader make decision because it's unlikely that any application has no vulnerability. I just, honestly, I don't believe in that. There will be, given the complexity of software, there will be some vulnerability because either it's a 0 day or it's been there, right? Because it's almost impossible to really resolve all the vulnerabilities, right? So having that thing will make the business leader be more secure in terms of, hey, this is, say, because when they are shipping a software or when they are deploying it, they want to be personally assured that, hey, they are doing the right thing, right? So we want to make sure that, and that's where the line is getting critical, right? Because even some of the regulations are asking these execs to sign that they have followed the secure development practices, right? And for them, having the visibility is the first step. Before this, and you shall do these things, and knowing what they are doing, at least I think that's where I see that the biggest reward of, or the biggest outcome of all these attack has been that at least people really want to be now know that, hey, where their software are coming from. Are they coming from a secure place or it's how it was developed? So I wouldn't say that it does, but because one of these escapes has a real business impact, right? So suppose some companies, they sit the software which has some of these critical vulnerabilities or has malicious code in it, and it gets exploited, right? And the reputational harm as well as the business harm will be, it's unmeasurable, right? It's how do you manage that risk profile, right? And that's what I get to, right? That you won't be able to eliminate all the risks, but at least you can manage the risk.
All right. And not only reputational risk, but regulators have shown that they will make you pay for not, sometimes things happen beyond your control, but it's, ignorance of the law is not an excuse.
So I think the regulators are actually, to your point, they are actually making you pay if you did not pay it. At least you, in good faith, you did not follow the secure development practices. So they would not hold you accountable because someone found some 0 day vulnerability someday and exploited it right now. At least in US and EU, we are not seeing that, right? But at least they expect that you followed in good faith some of the precautions which you should have taken, you have taken it.
Right. And honestly, if you're following those practices, I would assume that going back to the developer side, that is unburdening developers. But why?
Yeah. When I was developer, I shouldn't say the word hate, but I really hate it at the very end, which I have to ship the software. Now I get these 15 checklists which I have to go through. So we have to scan it, then you did not use the proper license or use something which you should not be using, or you have vulnerabilities, right? And because I had no idea that these things are getting introduced in my development lifecycle, right? Because I was just developing my application, right? So we talked about that we should sign and verify during coding, right? It's easy for me to say, right? But for developer, his main focus is to develop the application, right? So unless we automate the process that whenever he does a pull request and commit request, it gets automatically signed, right? Now we are adding one more task on his daily thing, which he may be doing twice or three times or 10 times a day. Some additional thing, right? So it's easy for us to say that we add all the security guardrails. If we just adding more things to developer plate, their core competency is developed application. They would not be able to do it. And we like it or not, they will find way around these checklists which we have asked them to do, right? That's what I mean by unburden the developers. We do want to have all these secure practices that you use, sign and verify. When you use the libraries in your ID, you would like that those plugins to tell you that, for example, someone using VS Code that, hey, by the way, this library has these vulnerabilities. Can you upgrade to that one? We want those kind of indications right in the developers, the working environment, day to day, versus waiting till the end. And what we have seen with, at least in my experience, that if they are aware of those risks and we automate it, they will do the right thing. And for them, it's okay. Not this version, I'm going to use this version. And this version is not signed, I'll use that one. That's what I mean by unburden the developers, right? Make it easier. Let's make life easier for them, so not more complicated because we have to go through these 20 new checklists.
Gotcha. So let me ask you something that has definitely come into the forefront and keeping with the unburden the developers, which is using AI for assisting with coding. Everybody has their own different flavor of what that is called, and I don't really want to go into there. But are you allowed to? But can you talk about some of the risks that to the software supply chain security, supply chain itself, with possibly allowing that, especially since we're still not sure maybe where the hallucinations are. We're still not sure the risk involved. I'm not trying to answer the question, but I just wondered your take on it.
No, you're absolutely right. So I think there are multiple thoughts on that, whether it should be there or not there, right? But it will be there one way or another. I remember when I was developing, I would go and look for something similar what I'm doing, right? Trying to search the web and trying to see, hey, if someone has done it, and go on and take from there, right? The key is transparency and visibility, right? So for developers, it's okay to, what I see, at least in my opinion, that it's okay to use the code assistants, right? There's nothing wrong in it, as long as they are aware that the code which the AI agent has generated, right? What is the risk profile for that? For example, the code they have created, is it using some of the libraries which they are not allowed to do that, right? Or what's the risk profile? Is there a critical vulnerability in there? Because these AI assistant also gets trained, but it may be trained, I would say, back in time when what you're using is much more today's clock.
Right.
They may not be aware, right? So we want to at least have the visibility of two things. One is the risk profile of the software which was created, right? And that's one. Second is the provenance, right? Where they got, because some of these, mostly finance industry, have very strict regulations, what kind of software and what kind of libraries from where you can use them.
Right.
And those things should be visible to developers, right? So if those are there, right, they are aware that what code got created, what the risk profile and where it came from. I think it will actually help in productivity of developers. What kind of agents to use is very debatable.
Just leave it there. That this it's a vendor issue at that point. No, but it should. Okay, in your opinion, you feel that it is something that could definitely be helpful, but it sounds like we continue to go back to keeping the integrity of either the software itself or the tools that we're using to understand the provenance, to understand the risk profiles. And without that, it seems like there are some good hard and fast rules about software supply chain security that we should always keep with no matter what we're doing.
Yep.
So what do you work on a daily basis? Again, that you're allowed to talk about at Red Hat.
Okay. I think so. One other thing at Red Hat, I think we have this trusted software supply chain, right? We just started 3 years back, and the whole thing was that our customers came to us and, hey, you do the open source software development, right? You take these projects, harden it, security harden it, and then you create enterprise product, right? And that's one of the key value prop we give, right? Why can't they do it? And we didn't really have those kind of processes and product defined. So we had the internal processes, right? So one other thing which I spent time on is trying to learn that how internally we do it and trying to see how some of these practices and processes can be made product, right? Mm-hmm. For example, we do participate in many open source projects, like Sigstore is one of them, which we use internally for the software integrity. That why can't we offer them to enterprises so they can actually use that for sign and verify, right? One other thing we liked about that is that whole thing about keyless, right? So not everyone need to sign using keyless. It can be just their ID or any kind of open connect IDs, right? So because every different. But those things, what I explore that, hey, how we do it, can we make a product out of it? And that's what we have done with the trusted software supply chain, that how to maintain the integrity of software, how do you manage the risk profile of the software, or how do we internally try to help our engineers be aware that, hey, so that they don't really butt head with the product security at the very end. I have done with it, you should ship it. But one other thing which I also add there, right, every enterprises has their own development life cycle, right? They have built it over time. So the challenge what I have is that how do we take the security guardrails, right, which we do, and apply that to the customer development environment versus what Red Hat internally do, right? Because just because we have the whole end-to-end supply chain solution, it's not, no one is going to just replace it, right? So they have hardened it over 2 decades, 3 decades. So we want to make sure that when these products are more pluggable and given the customer the flexibility to integrate them in their environment versus replacing.
And what do you see on the horizon? I guess I'll just stop there and let you go because you're ready.
No, so I think there are two things, right? Just you mentioned the AI, right? So we see two things, which is very critical. One is basically leveraging AI for the software supply chain security, right? Because one of the key value add of some of these large scale model LLMs are that they can actually process a lot of data. They have a lot of knowledge, right? And that can be leveraged to really how do we strengthen the supply chain security. That's one. Second thing is that the whole AI model security, right? Because that's another black box, which is for most of the supply chain perspective, right? We get these models, very few folks or very few of these models come with the software bill of material or the provenance or the transparency, how it was trained, how it was built. Does it have somewhere, right? So those two are very, to your question, right? I wouldn't say worries me, but that's the other, I see the roadmap for the supply chain going, right? Trying to leverage the AI as well as trying to help the AI so that it becomes more open and transparent.
Yeah, okay.
So I think the second one is very interesting, right? Because you look at these large scale models, right? Even a lot of people are developing application on top of, which is really what the industry is going on and leveraging AI, right? But everyone is treating these AI models or fine tuning these AI models as black box, right? No one knows that where the provenance came from, whether there's a vulnerability there or not, right? How it was built and there's CV or not, right? Just to give you one example, in 2000, there are thousands CVEs, right? And in 2023, there are 29,000 CVEs reported, right? You look at some of these models, right? You will not find any of the CVs reported, right? But though these softwares are really complex software, right? So it makes you wonder, right? How do we assure the supply chain security or the software or these models are secure, right? I think bringing some transparency and provenance and how it was built, what are the software component, what are the data component, they will actually make the adoption much easier.
That is one thing I wondered because, I don't know if within FINOS we have an AI readiness initiative that launched earlier this year. And it's not even about open source. It's really about how banks are dealing with AI in the first place. Not only the integration, but then the security side of it and all the above. The second piece of that is the LLM side and figuring out how to develop open LLMs for financial services. And then that has been in the back of my mind. How do you make sure that you have the transparency within the LLMs in order to get to exactly what you were saying? Is there enough information and I go back to what feels like this entire industry, which is there enough openness within the LLM to make a regulator happy? Forget the CVEs.
Yeah, right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and then to your point, right? Regulator is regulator happy, even the business exec happy, right? Because they need to be aware that my application is going to the answer in the way in which I want it to be answering it, right?
True.
So because they are, as I said, they've been trained over billions and billions of data points, and it is extremely hard to test each and every possible combination and permutation of all the questions which could be asked and answered. So that's just not possible. So I think one of the key thing I see that for financial or any of the enterprises to start adopting these in large scale is that having assurance that, hey, we know what we are using, because most of these companies will not be developing base model, right? They will be taking some base model, some hopefully open source base models, and then fine tuning it based on the data what they have in there, because they do want to cater to their own customers, right?
Right.
That they have the integrity in that, but nothing is tampered. No one really has malicious prompts injected in it, or they have not really tampered with the data where they're trained on. So having that transparency. Just like I see the same, that the reason I mentioned that in the earlier stages, we have thousands of CVs, right? I think that transparency, bringing those transparencies, will have these business execs that, hey, it's okay to use these models because I know this is the risk. And this has been collaborated throughout the community because no one companies will be able to really assure the whole that, hey, this is what is secure or it's okay to use, right? And I think FINOS and some of these organizations can really help, right? Because the way we see it, that is some of these financial industries can come together and say, okay, we know this model, this is the pattern we follow, this is the security can actually satisfy the regulators, because regulators are looking also to the multiple input points that how are, for example, one company goes there and, hey, this is the standard practice we are following. And by the way, other banking industries are also following same thing. Then it just shows them more versus someone doing something completely different, right? Into the full chain, right? So,
Very good. I have two last questions for you. One, and then maybe we can do it in the show notes as well. Is there any place that you would point to for either, let's say on two sides, one, a developer just getting started, or on the other side, a business leader to learn more about keeping your software supply chain best practices?
I think for developers, I would strongly encourage to have some kind of, when developers join any new enterprises, right? They are trying to develop their application, make their mark, right? I think that's simple. Any developer would want to do that, right? I think it's secondary for them to have these security guardrails following because they think these are the processes which are slowing them down, right? I would strongly suggest these enterprises that we need to automate these processes and security guardrails. It cannot be left to individual developers to go and, for example, signing and verifying, or even looking at the risk profile or upgrading to new version. We should have those things in the pipeline system so that when they click on it, this is automatically built for them. Eventually, they will modify it. That's one. Second, for business execs, right, into your question, right, what we recommend is that you would not be able to 100% mitigate the risk, right? But what we say is that focus on the visibility, that can you bring visibility and transparency to the whole supply chain. So for example, a new CV comes into that, can you get the visibility that what all software application you are developing is getting impacted, right? We say blast radius. You would be surprised. We all hear about Log4j. And 70% of enterprises still have that version running somewhere. They just don't know where it is running. So I think for business execs, my request would be that try to see if they can get visibility into their supply chain, that what's the blast radius, so that they can mitigate the risk. They would not be able to eliminate it because that's the nature of this fast-paced innovation, right? They always new software, new vulnerabilities, but at least they can get visibility, right? And I think if we focus on unburdening the developers and business execs helping get the visibility, I think that we form a closed loop chain that they get visibility, they can let developers know, hey, and then gets that whole thing chain flowing versus business leaders, because they have to attest these software practices, coming up with the checklist and putting that to development organization to follow the checklist. That will just slow down everything. It's not that it will not work, but it will just slow down everything.
Very good. Last question. Where are you? Because my ADD bells are going crazy with the planes that keep taking off every 30 seconds behind you.
So this is Red Hat office in Santa Clara. So
okay.
I like so this is real background. It's not the virtual background.
Not AI. Not like mine.
Not AI, not recreated. I love this sunny California weather, right?
No.
Yes. After COVID, I just simply can't work from home. If there is an office and I'm in town, I want to go to office and work.
Sure did. No, looks beautiful there right now. Yes. Yeah, that's exactly where I am right now. And in fact, I will where are my video settings? Yeah, this is definitely the best part of the podcast right here, is taking I can't figure out. Yeah. So I'm at home and I think it used to be a man cave. Now and also my son's bedroom at some point, but now it's just my whiteboard and some memorabilia. So yeah, no, I love getting into offices. I love getting into beautiful offices like where you are right now too. I guess maybe when I'm in Santa Clara next time, I'll
Well,
come
you
hit
should
you up.
stop by. Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds good. Love to have her. It's awesome.
Sudhir, thank you so much. I love doing this podcast because I learn every single time from every guest, and definitely from you as well. I do the podcast really to learn in order to be able to speak intelligently across the software projects that we have. So this helps. I feel like I can actually talk a little better now.
Well, thank you for the time. And I think this is an interesting topic. And I think good thing with the FINOS and other, I just said, they can help move the industry in the right direction, right? Because there are new things coming up. And as a community, right, we can do these things much better versus individually, right? That helps both the company as well as the industry, right? So always willing to come and spend time here.
Well, thank you. And my dog thanks you, apparently, too. Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. And I'm going to say with that to our audience, good day, good night, wherever you are. And thank you, Sudhir.
Thanks.